Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Sarah Lipscomb, the Program Director of the All-America City Awards and Community Assistance here at the National Civic League. I want to say thank you again to everyone for joining us, and I know we've still got people signing on. We're going to go ahead and get started, and as you heard a moment ago, this webinar will be recorded, and you all will receive that in your email follow-up directly after the webinar today. So feel free to share it with others in your community who weren't able to join the call, so they still have access to the information. In today's webinar, I really want to give a lot of time at the end for you all to ask questions. So I'm just going to go through a few slides on the logistics of the application and the application process itself. And then we are very lucky to be joined by Jackie Rossetti, the Deputy Communications Manager in Somerville, Massachusetts. And Somerville is a 3-time All-America City winner, and Jackie has come and volunteered at the All-America City Awards several times. So she's going to be a great resource and is going to give you guys a great perspective from a previous winning community to help answer you all's questions as well. And just so you know, we had a similar webinar in September featuring a few other previous winners. And if you weren't able to join that one or haven't seen that on our website, I'll be sure to send that in the email follow-up as well. So I do apologize if some of this information you all have already heard, especially anyone who's had an individual call with me. You've heard me say a lot of this before. But for 2018, the National Civic League is really focusing on equity in all of our programs, and the All-America City Award is no different. So our theme this year, as you all I'm sure have seen, is promoting equity through inclusive civic engagement. And for us, for 2018, we're really doing a revisit to 1968 and some of the pieces of legislation and the Kerner Commission that came out at that time, and really trying to set the stage for where we come in the past 50 years and where do we need to go moving forward to make sure that our communities are equitable and thriving for everyone. So, some key dates and deadlines for the actual application itself. February 28th, I know we'll be here before we know it, so we've got about a month and a half before the application itself is due. And that's another reason why we wanted to have this webinar in January. As you all get into starting to write the application, new questions come up, and we want to be sure that we're available to you all for that. As the email I sent yesterday, I do suggest that you look at the application as we're going through this webinar, because I just wanted to point out a few important, especially logistical pieces. So as you can see, the application itself is due on February 28th, and we do ask for an electronic version and a mailed version. And for the electronic one, we do ask for it to be a Word document, and pictures are not allowed in the application itself. And we also have a file name that we would like you all to use, which is going to be State, City 2018 AAC app. And if you didn't catch that as I'm saying it, don't worry, it's right there on the front page of the actual application itself. And then we also have the mailed hard copy, and just so you all know, it does not need to be on my desk by midnight, February 28th. It just needs to be postmarked by February 28th. So you don't have to worry about overnighting it or anything of that nature. It's really the emailed one that needs to be in by midnight on the 28th. You'll also see there that we do have an application fee. So if you submitted a letter of intent by October 18th, your application fee is only going to be $150. And you can make that out to the National Civic League, and our address is right there. And if you do not submit a letter of intent, the application fee is $250. So moving on with a few more logistics, as you all see, after the applications are submitted, it usually takes about 3 weeks for our application review committee, which is made up of National Civic League staff, board members, and some from our Council of Advisors. And those are people in local government and the public sector, philanthropy, schools, universities. So we try to have a wide range of people looking at all of these applications. And we'll get into the criteria on the next slide, but that is exactly what the scoring sheet is going to look like for the application. So you guys already have that, and that is exactly what the application review committee will have in front of them, just the criteria for the award as they are reading through all of the applications. So from there, in early April, we will announce the finalists, and they will be invited to Denver to present to our national jury. And there's usually between 10 to 12 people on the jury. Some would have served on the application review committee, but not all. But they will all be required to read the applications that were submitted before coming to the actual competition. And again, it's going to be that same score sheet that is just the criteria. And then they will review the presentations that the finalists give in Denver with that exact same scoring sheet. So just to be clear, finalists are chosen solely based on the application, and winners are chosen based on the application and presentation at the conference in Denver. But I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. If you are chosen as a finalist, we will be talking a lot. I will have another webinar. There'll be lots of information to help you navigate the process after that. But just wanted to give you a little heads up on how the process works in general. Okay, so moving on to the criteria. I know that you all have seen this before, and like I said, the scoring sheet for the application and the presentations will look exactly like this. And our reviewers and jury members will have space to rank your application 1 through 5 on each of these criteria, and a space for notes and noteworthy pieces that really exemplify these criteria in your application. And again, I've said this a million times, so I'm sorry if you all have already heard this. But as you're thinking about writing your application, be sure to understand that not every project you submit has to have all 5 of these criteria very clear in each project. What's really important is that these 5 criteria are seen and really shine through in some part of your application. So what I mean by that is, if you have a really standout program on how you're combating homelessness, and you all really engage with the people who are experiencing homelessness to help set up the program or implement the program, and you guys have really great impact and demonstrable figures to show, but maybe it's not quite so collaborative. There's only 1 or 2 groups working on it, or maybe the innovation piece isn't quite there. That's okay. Because you can show the pieces that aren't a part of that project somewhere else in the application. So as you're picking your projects, don't get too bogged down in making sure each one really shows each criteria. Look at your application as a whole and make sure each criteria is seen there from the perspective of an application reviewer or a jury reviewer, so you can say, yep, they're going to be able to see our innovation here in our application. Yeah, they're going to be able to see inclusiveness and equity here in our application. So be thinking from that perspective as you guys are putting it together. And most of the criteria are pretty self-explanatory. One tip that I do try to give people, especially on the collaboration one, just because it seems, a rather easy one to incorporate, but one way that is very obvious for reviewers to see is if you have different leads on some of your projects. They don't all need to be local government led or chamber led, whoever the main group is submitting the application. We definitely encourage you to have projects that are spearheaded by different groups throughout the community to really show that collaboration. And again, I know I'm going through this kind of fast, but there will be plenty of time for questions after Jackie speaks here in a moment. So I just want to go through the different application sections quickly, talk a little bit about the benefits, and then I'm going to hand it over to Jackie. But as you guys will see, we do ask for community statistics and a map. And that's just to give, you know, our jury and application review team is national, so just to give us some local context about your community itself is helpful before reading the application. You'll notice part 1, how equitable are opportunities in your community. If you've applied before or have seen a previous application, this is a brand new section of the application for 2018. And I don't want people to get too weary about this section. And as it's written in there, we know that not everyone is doing this and that it is a newer concept for some communities, and that's okay. We're trying to use our platform with the application to push communities in this direction and to get communities thinking about how could you do this in your community. So we're talking about looking at all of your decisions, your plans, comprehensive, strategic, things of that nature through an equity lens. And we have some examples there in the application itself. So what do your contracting and vendors look like compared to the full demographics of your community? What about your city staff and city leadership? Your elected officials, those who are on your boards and commissions, do they reflect all of the different demographics of your community, all the different perspectives in your community? And that's more about the people who are involved in decision making. And then we also want to look at the decisions that are actually being made. Are they equitable? So that's more of the where are the updates to infrastructure going? What roads are being repaired? What sections of town are getting new parks and what aren't? So it's those kinds of things that we're looking for. And again, if you aren't measuring that in your city as of now, that's okay. That's why you can just provide a brief narrative about how you could see that being incorporated into your city moving forward. Now part 2, tell your community story, will look familiar. That's been a staple part of the application for a while. We did shorten it this year to make room for some other pieces in the application. So just wanted to point that out to make that one a little bit more brief. And that's really just to give the reviewers a context of your community, very, very brief history, very brief overview to help them understand how your projects later in the application kind of all fall into place. Part 3, describe your civic engagement in your community. That's also a newer section. So we have taken those 5 pieces from our civic index, which is something we use in our technical assistance in communities. And we really wanted to draw out what are the processes that you all are doing on a day-to-day basis that creates the culture of engagement in your community, regardless of what the issue is. So what are the avenues that your residents can get involved? Do you have boards and commissions? Do you have council member night out or mayor's night out? Are you having community dialogues about different issues that come up? Do you have a community visioning process? All of those things that you all are doing kind of day in and day out to make sure that you have the pulse of the residents at the center of what you're doing, and not necessarily any specific issue-driven thing, but just what are those processes that you have set up to make sure the residents' voice is always a part of what you're doing. And then lastly is the very long part, which is part 4, which includes the 3 community-driven projects. And I've heard over and over again that choosing the 3 projects is by far the hardest part, but I think that that is a great problem to have. We know that you guys have really outstanding things happening in your community, and it is hard to narrow it down to 3. So some of the advice I give is not to try to overload all 3 projects. You can include several projects under one. I do caution about really making it readable and flow nicely from a complete outsider perspective. So as you're writing the full application, but especially this part, be thinking about what questions an outsider would have. Would this make sense to someone who hasn't heard of our programs and projects before? Is it clear how we're writing this and how this fits into our overall community's goals. So if you do include a few smaller projects into one project description, just be very clear that they are all, trying to accomplish one single goal and they work together in that, or something of that nature. We don't, just want a bullet point list of the projects that are happening, but we really want to dig deep and learn about how you guys came to start these projects, what outcomes you're getting, who's involved, and what you see as the vision or success of the project moving forward. You can also always turn to your community to help you choose which 3 are the best for this specific application, and always use the criteria to help you narrow it down. And if there are a few projects that you think need to be mentioned, but maybe they work better under the describe your civic engagement, or should be mentioned in the community story, or how equitable are opportunities, that's always a good option too. Okay, and with that, I just want to briefly touch on the benefits, but then I want to turn it over to Jackie. And coincidentally, it is Somerville who is in the picture on this slide. But we've seen communities have increased civic pride and community collaboration from being named a finalist, from being named a winner, and even just completing the application process in itself, really finding new collaborations in the community, new partnerships, just by having to fill out the application. Some of the economic benefits, increased tourism, grants, businesses relocating to cities, and we've got a long list of examples of those that I would be happy to share that people have used in marketing in their city to convince people to apply for the award. We also try to give a lot of great benefits to those who are part of the AllAmerica City and National Civic League Network by doing the monthly webinars on other topics. We have a database of promising practices. We also offer people free engagement consulting, things of that nature. And then finally, you're able to share your story on a national stage. And we really want to help uplift these stories, especially places that maybe people haven't heard of, and really help to move the needle on all communities in the United States working together and creating equitable opportunities for all of us to thrive. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Jackie to talk about Somerville, and then we'll open it up for questions. And since there are quite a few of you on the line, if you have a question, go ahead. You can start typing it in the chat box. And if you will, just hit the drop down and send it to the host or AAC only. And I will start fielding those for you so we can get them answered after Jackie speaks.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everybody. So I'm really excited to be able to present, again, thank you, Sarah, for the opportunity, about our experience with AllAmerica City. I've been involved with AllAmerica City myself since 2008. I have I've applied or gone to the awards in various locations 4 times, and I volunteered once, I think, but I'm always interested in the opportunity to go back. So I've been quite a bit. I know a lot about it. I'm going to keep this as brief as I can, just to allow Sarah to answer questions, or I can answer any questions you might have. My contact information is going to be right at the end of it, so if anybody thinks of questions later, they can go through Sarah, or you can just copy it down and email or call me anytime. So I want to quickly build on one thing that Sarah said about the benefits of the overall program and meeting, presenting on a national stage. But one thing that I found time and time again is not only meeting people and networking and learning more about other communities, you learn a lot about your own through this whole process. And that's not something that I expected. So I think you should use this as an opportunity to learn more about new people that you may not always work with. It can be a little difficult and daunting to kind of do that, but we'll get there. So I want to touch on two specific pieces, my own experience going through the application process, because I've done it a couple of different ways, and then my experience with actually being on the ground, giving the presentation and sort of the overall flow of the event. Sarah, I think I sent this presentation up to have animation, so yeah, sorry about that. So a couple of areas, the pictures that you're going to see behind are our last go-around with AllAmerica City. So this is the group of about 40 or so people that we traveled to Denver with in 2015. The first piece, obviously, is writing it. I've done this in a number of ways over the last 4 times that I've applied. It either came up as an idea sort of internally in our own city government. It's also come to us because we have the means to be able to dedicate to doing this, but it's come from community members saying we want to go back, we want to do this again, we have great projects. So we've had it kind of, for all intents and purposes, top down, even though that's not necessarily true, but and then from kind of the ground up and everything in between. The first time that I applied, we had a very small group of people, maybe 2 to 3, who wrote the application, and it changes slightly, I think, maybe not each time, but every time I've done it, it's been a little bit different. That was easy in some ways because you have one consistent voice and you're able to kind of get everything down on paper and then work with the community from there. It's more difficult in some ways because you're in a small group and you don't necessarily have the benefit of working with everybody to get all of the ideas down on paper. The more recent times that I've done it, I've kind of gone to the middle, which, again, this may not all be, you may not all be able to do the same thing, but I've had experience with all 3. What I found works really well is thinking about projects that you may want to write about and kind of having a focus group of sorts. So, a smaller to medium-sized group of people from different sectors in your community, residents, a nonprofit stakeholder, and things like that, and kind of talk through what you're thinking. They may have other ideas that are stronger, that have more collaboration that you didn't think of initially. And then you kind of assign people some tasks. So one person can be, the primary writer, so it's in one consistent voice, but somebody may be in charge of collecting data, or, you could also set it up so that one person writes about one project, another person writes about another project, and you kind of pull it together in that way. But having a focus group really allowed our community to all have input into it, but then have a small number of people writing it so it didn't get too daunting too quickly. And then after we did that in our focus group, we had simultaneously been working to put out information and a call to the community to see who might be interested in participating if we were to be selected to travel to Denver this last time. So we were working with anybody and everybody who wanted to potentially go, and at least giving them the opportunity right up front to weigh in on our projects and our theme and how the whole process was going. So it really was a true collaborative process, which is, again, in keeping with the big spirit of the award itself. That was really rewarding for a lot of reasons, and whether or not you choose to go the small group or individual application writer route or a larger group, I found real value in collaborating with a lot of people, at least in the review. And then Sarah touched mostly on including projects, but for us, it varied from time to time, but we focused a lot on our community-based processes. So we do have a community visioning process where, hundreds of people were giving input. We have a lot of youth-driven projects that I found really rewarding because, it's not something that necessarily adults develop and carried out. You've got a lot of younger people who are invested in this particular project, who are really proud of it, and they're going to get to present on a national stage, which is really exciting for us. But Sarah kind of talked about how to choose your projects, and so I won't get too much into that. I'm happy to answer questions afterwards on how we chose ours because they were, different from year to year. But, yeah, we had kind of all of them up. Our first win was with a transit project that a lot of folks had input on. And then the most recent time we did a host of 3 different youth-related projects, and one was between youth and police relationships and how they work together in a number of ways here. So at the end of this, I also have links to our applications and to our video, so you can take a look at those if you'd like. And then on the next slide, Sarah, is the information that I have about the presentation and how we prepped for that, tips and sort of information based on what we have done, and I'll use the most recent experience in this case just because it's the freshest in my mind. Whether or not you're going to move forward 100% with the application, or you're still not sure whether you'll be able to take a large or a small delegation with you if you are selected as a finalist, just go ahead and start planning as if you are taking, you know, a larger group so that you can kind of back out of that. That's my best advice. The first time we went, we took a group of 8 or 9 people because we really just weren't sure what to expect. We kind of, we listened to webinars and had phone calls, but we were just not really sure that we could fund a lot of people going, and we have a lot of fundraisers going on here, as I'm sure many other communities do each and every day. So we had, you know, representation from all over. We had nonprofit, we had youth, but it was a very small group, and we never felt like it wasn't enough. We've been in years where 1 or 2 person delegation has won, and a community who has, you know, dozens of people in it was not selected as a winner in the end. So really, in my experience, it doesn't matter who's able to go, just that you are able to present your information and your project well and with community spirit. So don't let it be too daunting for you, but in the event that you are considering bringing, you know, more than 5 to 10 people, fundraising is more likely than not going to be very important. We have a great partnership with our local Chamber of Commerce and some other business associations. So we did partner with them a couple of times when we were prepping to make the trip. We did some events to fundraise. We asked for some business sponsorship of, particularly of youth who may not be able to fund the trip themselves. We always aim to not have people have to pay their own way. You know, we're blue-collar community. We've got 76,000 residents, many of whom are first generation, who are immigrants, who are young students. So, you know, we don't want to open it up and say, we have this great opportunity, but we don't have money for you. So we did make that our goal. That's not always possible. So there are some folks in our group who kind of volunteered that if we weren't able to meet our fundraising goal, they would still be interested in going. So we just kind of early on filled that out and figured out, okay, how many people do we think we could realistically fund to go? And that is largely dependent on where you're traveling from. I know a lot of communities will rent a bus or kind of have a caravan, but for us, traveling from eastern Massachusetts all the way up to Denver, it was less expensive for us to fly, but still very expensive. So I would, right off the bat, use your potential travel plan as a basis for how much you think you might need to raise, and how easy it is for you to get community members. For example, again, I'll use young students and young children who you may want to have accompany you. Is it feasible to do any of those means of transportation more so than another? And then, again, if you have questions on how we fundraise, we've done a couple of different things, but we did partner with business organizations, and we found that to be very helpful in a number of ways. One other thing, I guess, another thing, not maybe one other thing to put out there right now is practice. Once you've got your application submitted, or maybe even before, when you've got your projects solidified, and potentially even before you've, again, been notified that you may be a finalist, just get your group together and start talking through some ideas, because really when it gets down to crunch time in the months leading up to the event and the presentation, it can get pretty tough to pull everything together. So start thinking about if there's one particular project that you want to highlight more than another, or how you wrap all 3 together, and then think about, do you need to bring anything to demonstrate your project. A lot of people will bring props and visuals, and it's really effective in getting your message across, but that does tend to take time to fabricate. Some are really elaborate in my experience, and some are some photos and some props that you can gather on your own. And again, it's more about how effectively you can communicate the message, but particularly if you're bringing a larger delegation, you're going to want to get as many people as possible in the headspace that they know exactly how you want your presentation to go. Make sure that there's equitable parts of the presentation across all of the delegates, and have fun. It shouldn't be, a stiff presentation. It can be daunting to be in front of this national panel of judges and more than 100 people in the audience, but it really is so much fun, and you can have a lot of fun with it. And I would also advise people who are going to start to practice or think about this in advance. It's also about your actual application. So it's not just about choosing a project and sticking to that and presenting it to the jury. Once you're in front of a jury, they take about 10 minutes for Q&A, and they will ask you questions based on what they heard in your presentation. They'll also ask you some detailed questions about what was in your application. So you should know what's in there and make sure that you just have somebody who can answer questions based on both what you're presenting to them on a particular project and what's in your application. And then this gets into the nitty-gritty for later, but I find it really helpful to know that mistakes are okay when you're presenting. You don't have to be perfect. Again, you just have to be charismatic and clear in what you're presenting. I've seen groups who just will present information, with a lot of fact statements and throwing some numbers and some data, which is really effective. I've also seen communities, and we've done both. Most recently, we kind of turned it into a fun skit where we're getting information across, but also showing kind of how those projects work in the real world. And they've both been really impressive and impactful. So you can really have fun with it while getting information across, and you do not have to be perfect. The judges are not scoring you on how well you can deliver a line. They're scoring you on how impressive your community collaboration and engagement is. So just kind of keep that in mind, and don't let the whole process be too scary. It's fun. It's engaging. Once you're on the ground, it's just incredible. Every time that I went, or the first 2 times I went in the opening plenary, we had folks telling us, this really is a life-changing experience, and you're going to leave here and feeling completely different than you did when you walk in the door. And I will admit that I was skeptic, and I was like, yeah, this is really fun, but I'm not really sure what you mean by that. And I walked out the door never the same. You meet a lot of people from your own community who you may not have otherwise, and it really improves your collaboration and your partnership and your ability to further your projects and your work when you do return home. So keep all of that in mind. Know that you're going through a process like no other. It's incredible. And there's so many of us and folks at NCL who can answer questions and be a resource throughout the entire thing. That's kind of my high-level spiel. Here, this is, like I said, a link to a couple of different portions of our information. There's our applications are up on our website. That first link is from our 2009 win, and I recommend that video for us just because it's a highlight reel from the entire experience that we had. So there's interviews with our own community members, with some other community members, and you get to kind of see different pieces of the entire weekend. And then the second set of links is just our presentation and Q&A from 2015, which will give you a flavor of the entire soup to nuts time you're on stage. And then you can email me or call me, and I'll give you any other pieces of information that you need to know. Sarah, did I miss anything important?
No, you actually jogged my memory on a lot of things, so I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for sharing. You are invaluable to this program, and I'm sure you will be getting some phone calls and emails after this. And just so you all know, in the follow-up email, I have copied this slide specifically and put it in there for you all to easily find Somerville's information and Jackie's contact information for further follow-up. So we've had a few questions come in through the chat, and feel free to keep sending those in, but want to get started on answering some of them. So we did have a question about funding for travel when it comes to if you're chosen as a finalist coming to present, and how the conference, if there's a cost for that. So I'm thinking you could tell by Jackie's presentation, unfortunately, we cannot cover travel for everybody. That would be my ultimate dream one day. But we will work with you if you're chosen as a finalist with marketing to your chamber and other businesses and people in your community to help you fundraise. So as Jackie mentioned, definitely kind of be thinking about who those partners would be in your community, even as you're writing the application before you're notified that you are potentially a finalist. And when you're looking at the timeline, this year I have tried to give people more time to plan in between being notified that you're a finalist and when the actual event is itself. It says on the key dates and deadlines that April will be when we announce the finalist. It is my sincere hope, although I cannot promise it, that end of March we'll actually be able to announce. And the 3-day event itself this year is a little bit later in June than usual. So it's June 22nd through the 24th. So you will have at least 2.5 months to plan all of these pieces from being notified that you're a finalist to the actual event. And although it is a few more weeks than we have given people before, it will go quickly. So definitely take Jackie's advice on just kind of thinking through what those next steps are going to look like for you all. And we also want to use this as an opportunity for communities to get more people engaged, to really up your civic pride, even if you aren't chosen as a finalist, even if you aren't chosen as a winner. So by reaching out and making those connections that you could use to help fundraise moving forward, those are also good ones, you know, just to have in general and let people know about some of the great projects and programs that you all submitted, even if you aren't chosen as a finalist. I know there's some really great stuff going on out there. Something else I've mentioned before and wanted to touch on, you heard Jackie give all of this really fabulous advice, and we do try to match up applicant communities with previous winners as a mentor. And I know a lot of you on this call already have a mentor, but if you don't have one and would like to get connected, definitely email me after the webinar and we can get you paired with someone. And Jackie reminded me about all of the different youth that come to the event and kind of what the makeup of, if you are chosen as a finalist, what the makeup of your group should look like as you come to present. And as she said, you definitely want to make sure you have at least one person from each project you submitted who can answer questions. So again, the winners are chosen 50-50 based on the application and the presentation. And you will get a lot more information about the presentations later if you are chosen as a finalist. But they are only 10 minutes, and then there is 10 minutes of Q&A from the jury, as Jackie had mentioned, and they'll ask questions from the application itself or from the presentation. And they're not there to trick you. They are really there just to learn more, and a lot of them just get so excited because they live in communities too and want to be able to use your projects and programs and take them back home with them as well. But you do need to have people there that would be able to answer the questions. And I can't believe I forgot to mention this earlier, because this is one of the biggest things that I say and that I think is important about this process, but it is really to lead with your people. facts and figures are important, and they are helpful when we're trying to look at the impact of programs, but don't forget about the people who are experiencing those impacts. It is much more compelling to hear from a program participant what the outcome has been on their life because of a project they've been a part of, rather than having, the city manager or an executive director talking about all of the nuts and bolts. They're both very important, but I don't want people to lose sight of those stories and those experiences of those in your community. And when we talk about impact and future planning and visioning as a criteria, we're really talking about quantitative and qualitative. So even if you don't have quite as strong numbers to back up some of your projects, be sure to include quotes, stories, straight from the people who have benefited or helped plan or implement some of your programs. Another question that came in about the event itself is, even if you aren't chosen as a finalist, we invite everyone to come to the All-America City Awards. As Jackie said, it's a little bit different of an experience. At the opening plenary, there may or may not usually be beach balls going around, lots of fun music. There's about 500 people in a room, and a lot of youth and a lot of people who just care about communities and are excited to learn more from each other. And there's a lot of energy throughout the entire event. We also have workshops, speaker panels, things of that nature throughout the 3 days, because we really want to use the time together as an opportunity to learn from one another and really kind of elevate what people are doing in their communities and getting into the kind of the nitty-gritty and details about different projects and programs that you all might want to steal or adapt and bring to yours. I will briefly mention, in case you all have seen it before, just so you aren't confused, this year we are reinstating our national conference on local governance. The National Civic League had done it many years before, so now this is technically our 109th, and it will be the same Friday, so June 22nd, the same as the All-America City Awards, in the same hotel. So we're hoping that groups can learn from each other on that day. You all are also welcome to attend both, and I'll send that link in the follow-up email so you guys have a little bit more information. And those of you who do apply and maybe aren't chosen as a finalist, definitely recommend coming to that one, at least the one-day event, and learning from some of our speakers and panels there and getting kind of a feel for the All-America City Awards if you guys would like to apply in a future year. One more thing before I get to some of the other questions that keep rolling in is the amount of people to bring to the event. And as Jackie said, the number does not matter. It really is about how authentic you are and how you tell your story and how the criteria are coming through in your presentation. So we have had many communities with 4 or less people win on a regular basis, and then we've had communities, who bring 50 people who don't win. So be sure when you're looking at the past presentations, don't let it intimidate you. If you see a really flashy one with great props and lots of people, that is fun and entertaining, and people enjoy watching those ones too. But it really is about the substance that you're bringing to the stage and to the question and answer time. And to Jackie's point, definitely spreading out the speaking roles during presentation and during the Q&A is really helpful for the jury to get a full understanding of your community. Same as in the application itself, the more voices, even if you're only having one person actually physically write the application, the more voices and input that can be seen in the application, the better. So another question is about the registration for the conference. So if you are just attending the All-America City Award, it is $100 for the 3 days per person. For each finalist community, we do give 4 free registrations. And then we also allow any media person to come for free without registration. And I'm sure Jackie probably has quite a few thoughts on that. But we really want to help you to promote it back in your community through the local paper and things of that nature. So we welcome media to come out, and that people have done live streams while they're at the conference with their group to get people back home who couldn't come really involved. We also have social media contests that go on during the event to really make people feel who aren't there that they're still a part of the event and the weekend. So another question that's come in is how much history is appropriate for the application, and should it be focused on recent history or historical origins of the city? I would say 1 to 2 sentences about the historical origins is fine. Much more than that, I would not suggest including. Like I said before, we did cut that section's word limit because it is more about kind of the recent history and why you're at where you're at now, just to kind of give a little bit of background about why some of the issues your community is facing are there, or why some really great things are happening as well. But I definitely stay focused on more recent history, and especially anything that pertains to the projects that you have chosen and what you are currently working on when it comes to kind of the historical context of those. And then another question that just came in is about youth having to pay the conference registration fee. One of the reasons that we give the 4 free ones is that we're hoping, to use those for youth, although that's not a requirement. Every community gets them. And obviously, if you have very young children, that they will not need to pay a registration fee. But if people are a part of the presentation itself, we do require the fee. And again, that's for all 3 days of the event. And although we don't provide sit-down meals, we do, really try to, we have different receptions and things like that to give people heavier doors and things during the conference. So that's what those registration fees are going to. Okay, I think those are all the questions that have come in. Jackie, do you have anything else to add?
I don't. I mean, there's a lot of little intricacies if you are selected as a finalist that might be helpful if you've never applied before or never been to the award ceremony before, that I'm happy to kind of give my advice on. We had a mentor community our first year, and it was really invaluable. But there are some things that we walked into without knowing, and for example, like most communities will come and kind of wear team shirts or a way to identify your cohesive group that we didn't know the first time. And it's not necessary. It's just something that a lot of people do. So little things like that may not come up in conference calls and things that just a past participant might be able to give you tips on. I'm happy to do that. But really, I'm always incredibly happy to give advice or talk about AllAmerica City because I've been there 5 times, and clearly it's really important, or else I wouldn't have done it. I love it. So I highly recommend sticking with it. And even if you aren't selected as a finalist, or you are and you do not win, try again, because each experience is different. You'll always meet new people, and it's always a valuable opportunity.
Great. Thank you so much, Jackie. And we'll go ahead and give you guys back these last 10 minutes in your very busy days, I'm sure. And as Jackie said, she and I are always available, and we'll get you guys some information in the follow-up email this afternoon. And thank you so much.